Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with keystrokes and editing techniques found in our PC Link software. We want to learn keystrokes to be efficient with our software navigation and interfacing, doing calibrating and tuning. There are a lot of different keystrokes available to us within the software. We're only going to cover just more of the highlighted ones that I find to be the most useful. Again, there is a ton more available that I am not going to cover in this training module. You can find the full list of keystrokes here if you go under help and then go under keyboard shortcuts. We can find that there's a ton available in here. Again, I'm not going to cover probably a fraction of these because a lot of them aren't super useful, or at least I don't find them useful when I'm doing calibrating and tuning and working in the software, but they do exist. So if you want to go check that out, that is going to be where you find the full list. Okay. So we're going to start off this tutorial taking a look at probably the most basic function in our software. That's going to be doing a save for the file. Now we know we can go in the drop down under File and then Save, but we can also alternatively keystroke this without having to go in the drop down menu. And ideally, we prefer not to go into the drop down menu all the time. It's just one extra step navigating our software. So how do we do this? Pretty simple. If I go up here into the function keys, and I do F2, notice it says file saved successfully. It saved the file to the folder location and the file name that I'm working with right now. So we can see that's the folder, that's going to be the file. So it saved it over top of the existing folder and file. If I want to do a different name or change the location of where I'm saving it, I will have to go to the drop down to File Save As because that isn't available in a keystroke. Okay. Very basic there. Definitely want to know how to do a save function. The next things that I use pretty frequently in the software are going to be standard Windows keystrokes. We have copy, paste, and edit, undo. So copy, pretty simple. We'll highlight what we want to copy here. I'm in the main field table, so I want to highlight this area. That's what I want to copy. I'm going to do Control C. Pretty simple. And then I'm going to go where I want to paste. So let's say right here and do Control V. We can see that data has been changed right there. So it's copied what was in this column area and transferred it to this column area. Now, if I want to undo what I've pasted in there, undo changes that I've made, I can use the edit undo function, which is Control Z. So if I go here and I click Control Z, notice it's going to change one cell point at a time. So it allows me to kind of backtrack one step at a time here. So notice I'm hitting Control Z. Each time I'm hitting Control Z, it's changing that value within the table. And finally, if I hit Control Z again, nothing else changes because there's no other changes to undo. So those are pretty standard keystrokes that are Windows based that you probably already know. They are functional in the software because it is a Windows based software. Okay, so let's talk about a couple other additional things that are important to know before we head into talking about using editing techniques in keystrokes, because there's things that if we're in our field table, we're in our spark timing table, we're going to go after making our changes and updates in a very specific manner, and we want to know how to work with certain keystrokes to actually edit the table values as efficiently as possible. Now, before we move in there, if I click into any table, so I'm in my main field table, if I click K, that flips it over into the graphical view of the table. So we can see right here that it's showing me what the graphical plot is looking like here in the table. And then we have some options here. We can flip back up on the top if we want to go ahead and flip back and forth. We do have that icon available here, but if I click K, that allows me to go back and forth here. So we can see that allows me to flip back and forth in any table here. So if I click on the target lambda table, it shows me that. If I click onto the injection timing table, it shows me that. So some of them are going to be more useful to take a look at in the graphical format than others. The field table and the spark timing table are probably the two that I switch back and forth just to make sure things look smooth as I'm editing and working with the values in the table. So that is going to be another very basic keystroke, but very important. Definitely want to learn that. Okay, so another additional thing here in the actual tables, as we're talking about keystrokes, that's very important to learn. That's going to be how we edit the breakpoints in the table. The breakpoints are going to be what's found here on the axes. So this is going to be our side axes, which is the load axes, manifold gauge pressure based. The top axis is going to be engine speed. Maybe I want to change the axes, so I don't want it based on engine speed. Maybe I want it based on something else. Typically we don't do that, but let's just say hypothetically wanted to. Or I want to change the values in my breakpoints. Maybe I'm not revving my engine here out to 9,000 RPM, so I want to go and take away some of the breakpoints and shrink the table down. There's no benefit for having a table larger in size than we need, so if we're only revving our engine to 7,000, we don't need breakpoints going out to 9,000. Likewise, if we're naturally aspirated, we don't really need breakpoints much past 0 MGP or manifold gauge pressure. That's going to be atmospheric pressure there at 0. So we would want to do some rescaling. How do we do that? We can use a quick keystroke. If we click here on the table and click X, that pops up our axes setup window. This allows us to go in and then make those changes. If we want to change the parameter here, we can go in and click right here. This allows you to select a new parameter to go in and edit if you choose to do so. I'm not going to do that right now. And it allows us to go in and edit the individual breakpoints. We can see what shows here in our little table is going to be what shows in the breakpoints here on our main table. So we can edit and change that. Let's just say I wanted to get rid of the last two breakpoints at 8,500 and 9,000. I would click X here, that deletes them. And we can see they're gone now. If I click OK, there's a rescale. Now it's going to ask you if you want to interpolate the values in the table. Click yes. We can see it's going to update the table. So now it's not going out to 9,000 RPM. We've taken away the last two breakpoints, shrunk the table down a little bit, but we can see we can edit and work with that. So clicking on any table and clicking X allows you to add axes, take them away, and change these breakpoints on either axes of the table. All right, another very important, very powerful keystroke that you're likely to use on a regular basis. All right, let's talk about now the other option that we have here to go in and bring up the table menu. So if I go in and I do Control T, we can find that this menu appears. Now we can also right click and see the same menu pop up. I actually like the right click better, but Control T will give you that same functionality. This gives you the master list of everything we can do for editing. So for example, the axis setup, knowing X, the keystroke X that we hit before, we can actually select that right in here and have that same axis pop up. So you don't necessarily have to remember all the keystrokes because you can right click on any table and it'll pop up immediately on your window here so we can see what that looks like. So pretty simple there. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of those basic functionalities, let's now talk about some actual editing techniques. When we're in any table here, we have the ability to add, subtract, multiply, divide, or take a percentage of the value in the table to edit it. So for example, in the main field table here, I typically edit in terms of percentage changes. I do that because if I'm taking a look at something like my closed loop lambda field correction here, we'll talk about this in other tutorials, but this is how much the link is correcting against our field table at a given cell point location, how much it's adjusting the pulse width by, how much it's reducing or adding to the value in the table. Because of being able to work in a closed loop format, being able to watch that correction, if it's taking away 10%, let's just say at this cell point, I know I need to reduce the value by 10%. It's essentially highlighting and showing me how much things are off. So when we're talking about editing our field table, we generally are going to be editing it in a percentage change. We can do this in one of two manners. First way, let's say I highlight the area I want to go ahead and edit. Let's say it's rich in this area and I need to reduce the values. We can go in and use Shift and then asterisk, and we see an editing window pops up. Notice it's set here automatically to multiply. What we want to do then is change the number here. We don't want to get rid of the asterisk, but the blue highlighted number, we're going to go and change that to something else. If I want to go in and take 10% away, I'll type in 0.9. If I want to add 10%, I'll type in 1.1. If I want to take away 20%, I'll type in 0.8. If I want to add 20%, I'll type in 1.2. Let's just say I only want to add 2%. Well, that would be 1.02. If I want to go and reduce the fueling by 2%, we'll go in here and go 0.98. So let's type in here 0.98. So it's important that we have that decimal place there, but you can see how that functionality will work. Let me demonstrate this. Let's go back to 0.9 and just hit OK. We can see now the values have been changed. They're lower in that section of the table right here, and pretty simple in order to work with that. So let's do a edit undo. So we're going to do the Control Z option right here and just undo all those changes. Now while we have this highlighted again, what I'm going to do is now not use Shift asterisk to make the change, but we're now going to use the percentage adjustment. So I'll do shift and then percent, and now we can see it set up here to make a direct percentage change. Instead of using that multiply function and then going in and setting it to 0.9 to take away 10% or 1.1 to add it, that can be a little bit confusing if you're not used to that. Let's say I want to go and increase my values by 10%. That's going to have the same function as hitting shift asterisk and multiplying by 1.1. So we have the ability in our field table to edit in either multiply or percentage type of changes to get the same end result. It's really what you're more comfortable with doing. Now I'm going to go ahead and undo all of these changes, hitting Control Z here, get rid of all the values. So that's pretty simple. So when we're in the field table, we want to know how to edit it in terms of a percentage adjustment. That makes the most sense. So we're going to work with those percentage type of changes. Percentage or multiply, same idea. Let's jump into our spark timing table, because if we're in spark timing, we're not going to be changing things in terms of a percentage. We're either going to be adding or subtracting to the table values to increase or decrease our spark timing. Now, technically, you can edit the spark timing table values by a percentage, but typically, if I want to reduce my timing by, let's say, 2 degrees or add 2 or 3 degrees to the table, I'm going to highlight the area and then do the add or subtract option. That's pretty simple. Let's just demonstrate. I'm going to go in here to the table. If I jump in and I do Shift plus, now it's going to add whatever I set in here. So in this case, let's go ahead and say I add 4. It's going to add 4 to all the values that I highlight. So my spark timing is advanced by 4 degrees. Let's go here and undo that change. I'm actually going to take away 4 degrees. So we'll do Shift minus, and now we can see it's subtracting whatever I enter in here. So let's say 4. It's going to return it back to the table values that we saw previously. So the plus and minus, add and subtract, are what makes sense to edit the ignition timing table. When we're working in our fuel, that's going to be really a percentage adjustment. Shift asterisk or shift percent will be what we want to edit in the table to make our editing changes, to make changes into certain areas of the table. And again, the percentage makes sense because we're working in a percentage of adjustment down here in a closed loop correction. The link is showing us what it's actually adjusting by. Okay, so if we're taking a look, let's just say in our target lambda table, I'm going to do a direct entry in here. I'm not going to go in and add or subtract or change things by a percent. I'll actually manually enter in what I want for the actual value. If I highlight what I want to change, let's just say here on idle, and I want to change that from 93 lambda target to a 1.0 lambda target, I'll literally highlight, and in this case, I just type the number in here. We can see equals 1, click enter, changes it. Pretty simple there. So certain tables like injection timing or target lambda tables, we're going to do more of a direct entry into the table value. We're actually going to enter it manually. And then when we're working in spark timing or fuel, we're going to do that add, subtract, or percentage change. So hopefully it makes sense. So there are a few other keystrokes we might want to work with. I use these occasionally. These are going to allow you to move up or down the table values in increment or decrements. So meaning you can bump them up a little bit or bump them down a little bit. This is useful for, let's say, going in at idle and just trying to feel out getting your fueling in line. Maybe you don't want to go in and make those percentage adjustments. You'll bump up the values a little bit, maybe watch what the closed loop is correcting by, maybe bump them down. You have the ability to go back and forth. How do we do this? Pretty simple. I'm going to highlight this area. Let's just say this is going to be my idle area where the engine is running at. If I go here and click Q, notice it's slightly incrementing the values in the table. Now this might equate to maybe a percent, 2% change, very small changes in the table. So it allows you to move up or down the values. If I use A, that'll go and decrement the values. So this is going to reduce the values, very small amount. So we can use Q to increase, A to decrease. Pretty simple. We can also go in here and have a larger change. So those are small increment and decrement values or changes. If I do, in this case, shift and then Q, notice that what it's changing by here is a lot bigger of a value. So in that case, shift Q allows me to move or bump up the values in larger increments. And then we can also go ahead and move down in larger increments. We can decrement in larger increments, which is going to be shift and then A. We can move down the same, going up or down there. So Q increase, shift Q, shift A, decrease. So pretty simple there. Now, there are two other editing options that I don't really use very frequently. If I want to go in and edit a row or a column, I'm able to do that. So if I just put my cursor right here and I want to go in and edit this entire row of values, you're able to do that if we're going to go here and do Control Q. Notice that the entire row here is changing the values. We can see everything across that row is changing. Control A is going to be decrementing or decreasing these values. So that'll change that row. Alternatively, we can change or alter the column instead of the entire row by going in and using Alt Q or Alt A. So Alt Q increases a column, Alt A decreases the column. I don't typically use or work with any kind of row or column specific changes like that. If I am going to make the actual updates or changes in a column or a row, I'm going to go ahead and just go and manually highlight it and then go in and do a percentage increase or decrease in a field table, for example, or go in and add or subtract to this bar timing table. So really, out of the keystrokes I just mentioned, the Q and A or Shift Q and A, I think make the most sense if you're going to go ahead and use as kind of alternate editing keystrokes. Okay, so there are a few additional things that I want to bring up here in this training module, and that's going to be how we can smooth our field table or smooth a table that we're working with. This is going to go a real long way in making sure that your field table is shaped properly. We don't want to have high or low values in the table randomly in the cell points. We want to make sure it's relatively smooth. We can check on our work by going in here and flipping over to the actual view of the table here and just kind of go in and flip this around here a little bit. In the table, we can flip back in there. So we can take a look at that graphical plotting of it and just making sure that everything looks smooth in terms of our values in here. Now, how do we know when we're editing, making sure that things are going to be smooth? Well, we have a smoothing function. We also have a vertical and horizontal interpolation. So for example, if I'm going in here and let's just say I need a whole bunch more fuel on the table right here. So just kind of highlight that. If I'm going in here and I know, let's say I've swept up, I've driven into the table, I know it's lean here, I need to add some fuel. Let's do that real quick. So I'm going to go in and add, let's say 15% more fuel here. Well, if I need 15% more fuel here, and I know my values in my table are higher here as I'm getting up into the higher manifold pressures, I can actually interpolate and just kind of fill in between those two. So say I haven't hit the portions from 60 to 180 MGP, but I know I needed a lot more fuel here. Well, we are going to fill in the table. We can use, in this case, a vertical interpolation. So it's going to draw essentially a straight vertical line between the two values we have in here. So it's going to go and increment the values in a linear fashion. Just kind of think about going in a vertical line. It's going to increase everything between what we select here and what we select at the end. And it's going to do that in this column fashion. So if I do Shift and then V, it's going to fill those in so we can see it's filled the table in. That's going to be really important when we're dialing in the table. We can kind of populate things out very quickly. Now, in the same manner as we filled in right here, we're likely to need maybe a little bit more fuel down below. So let's go in and fill between these rows right here. So Shift V. We can see we filled that out. Now, we're going to find that we have a relatively large step here, 0 to, let's say, 1,000 RPM, and we want to go in and kind of backfill the table. We want to bring our values up here. We can use a horizontal interpolation. Horizontal interpolation is going to go here from this left column to the right column, and it's going to go, again, try to linearly increase the values in each row as we're interpolating. So if I do Shift H, we can see it's filled that in. Now, if we popped in to look at the three-dimensional view of the table, it'll be a lot smoother, more linear in its shape. We'll find things like our field tables should be relatively linear and smooth. They shouldn't be chaotic and having really high or low points in the table. We'll get into talking about that in a future training module, but learning the horizontal and vertical interpolation is very important. Now, there's a smoothing function. So after we've went and done our interpolation, we can highlight certain areas and just click O. Notice that's changed the values in here. It's going to smooth out the table a little bit. We want that table to be smooth. So again, we can highlight certain areas of the table and click O, and it'll go in and it'll smooth out the table values. So when we look at them graphically, they'll be a lot better and smoother shape. We can see the interpolation options and the smoothing option and how that works. Again, we're going to get into that, more of this as we go through the training course and into the live training. You'll see me actually using a lot of the interpolation and smoothing functions. I use those very frequently. Again, I want to have my tables nice and smooth and having a linear shape to a lot of the values, because as we ascend in load or RPM, typically we'll find that fuel is going to be going in ascending and increasing, and it just allows us to, and doing that typically in a linear fashion. So going in and using the vertical and horizontal interpolation allows us to populate and fill out a table very quickly, and then we can fine tune the cell points as we drive through it. But it allows us to build out the table pretty quick. Okay, so we went over the editing techniques that are pretty standard, pretty common here with the software, and definitely what you want to learn. Let's talk about a couple last additional things. Now we know within the table here, if we click on our table, we click H, that's going to take away the gradient. That's going to take away the color. Put back in there, we can see the color comes back. This is fine to look at when we're maybe doing some editing and doing some tuning, but we are able to make markings on the table to give ourselves an idea of what we've edited and changed, maybe what areas of the table haven't been changed. We can mark all of that up on the table, and when we flip over here and we take the gradient away from any table, we're able to see those distinct areas. For example, let's say idle and part throttle. I've tuned those very well. That's going to encompass the table here from, let's just go all the way here, from full vacuum, let's say is to the onset of boost here, and we've tuned up to, let's say, 4,000 RPM. So this area of the table, hypothetically, I've tuned already. I can mark this as tuned. If I go and click Z in the table here, so where I've highlighted, we can see that's going to turn all of those values green. Now, it's a little bit hard to differentiate right now because other areas, other values in the table are green. So what we've added here shows green, and these other values that have been changed also show green. So what we can do here is actually clear all of the table markings off. If I do Shift and then I do M, that should clear out the tables. Give that a second. Let's try that again here. Just give that a second. Usually it clears it out pretty quickly. And we can see the software is kind of bogging down, so we'll just be patient. So that's going to typically clear out all of our markings. We can see it's going to undo the tuned areas. We also can mark areas as partially tuned, and in that case, that's going to be different keystroke. Let's highlight the area. Partially tuned, say we swept through this once or twice, we can click Y, and Y is going to change these values, and it should be to an orange-red color. So there we go. We see that those have been updated. This gives me indication that I've went through here. They're probably pretty close. The Z marks them as fully tuned. Again, if I went through and I'm confident that those values are fully tuned, click Z. That'll change those out and gives us an idea of what we've done and what we haven't done in the table. So it's very, very useful as a tuning tool. We can change, if we take a look at this, because we have two different greens here kind of going on. If we go to our color theme, we should be able to change this out and maybe update that. So looking through here, values changed offline. We could probably change that to something else. Let's change it to something like a yellow and click apply. There we go. And then that allows to kind of differentiate there. So anything in the yellow here shows these are values we've changed offline. And then the table values that have been changed, we can see here if we go back to our color theme and jump down in there. If we're online, so right now, notice it's searching, we're offline. If we're online, it making those actual streaming changes to our link. If we take a look here, any values that'll change will be like kind of an aqua blue color in this particular color scheme. So it allows you to kind of keep an eye on what's going on and see everything. So everything in the green is good. We've tuned that. If we've marked an area here, let's say we haven't hit this area yet, or we've partially tuned this area, if I click Y, that'll change that to a orangish reddish color. That'll tell me I need to work on this area. And let's say in boost here, going in at higher engine speeds and loads, we haven't touched any of these areas yet. We can just set those as Y. Maybe it's partially tuned, or just give it an idea of what areas of the table we have to actually work with. Again, we can clear all this out by simply going in and doing Shift and then M, and clears out all of the markings that we've placed on the table. Again, this takes a second for that to clear all of that out of the table, but then we can essentially differentiate and clear that out. Let's say we're going in and maybe we're changing some things on the engine and calibrating and tuning, and we want to go back in and do some tuning. We'll clear that out so we know we have kind of a fresh slate or fresh start here in the table. We can see what we have to work on, what we still need to get to dial in and to tune. Okay, so that is going to be the kind of the bigger things that I work with in the software in terms of the keystrokes and the editing techniques. We've talked about a decent amount in this tutorial. I don't want to get too bogged down with very, very specific details. Again, if we're trying to actually calibrate and tune our main field table, we'll take a look at that process and looking at the closed loop correction. I did try to mention that a little bit. You'll understand a little bit better at that point, working in a percentage change. But working with and learning the keystrokes that I've mentioned in this tutorial are things that I use every day. I calibrate and tune with the link very frequently, and I feel that those are the things that make the most sense to actually grasp and really try to learn. Again, the whole list will be available here, so you can go back in and check on those keystrokes if you want to learn something additional we haven't covered in this tutorial, but what I've covered I feel is going to be the most pertinent, most important. Okay, that's going to wrap it up here for taking a look at and working with our keystrokes and editing techniques. Any comment or questions on anything we cover in this training module, post your comment or questions into the video comment section or into the private forum. I'll see you guys now in our future training tutorials.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.